Knowing God, the attributes of God, a thing that's true about God is how Tozer describes it. And how they speak to our lives, because it's not just a matter of knowing about them, but knowing how every one of these attributes of God, His holiness, His grace, His glory, His omniscience, His omnipotence, His eternality, His infinitude, His unchangeability, His immutability is the term which we're going to be looking at. All of these ideas matter. These are not just theoretical concepts, but they really matter. And that's why I want us to zoom in on the immutability of God today, because the last time we were together, just to remind you, we were looking at some that were more abstract. I mean, they're all beyond our comprehension. I mean, the God of whom we speak is utterly mysterious in His nature, yet He deigns, He chooses, He humbles Himself even to speak to us and convey to us, and giving us incredible dignity of agent causality, of participation in His wonderful purposes. He invites us to be a part of something that we cannot contribute anything to Him. He has no lack, no need. And yet, He invites us to participate and gives us the dignity of accomplishing something that will have reverberating impact into eternity. Because, as Lewis described it, you've never met a mere mortal. And so in loving Him and becoming like Him, you then become an agent of His grace and glory, mediating the love and grace and purposes of God in your sphere of influence in such a way that you're transforming lives by God's grace, and He's doing it in you and through you. And He's doing this and giving you the opportunity then to help people and empower people and encourage them to become more like Jesus and to pursue change. And this is what I'm always interested in, is application, basically inexplicable transformation in life and character. I can't account for this. How did this person become this kind of person? He's a new being. He's like a totally different. How did that happen? And you really know there's no naturalistic way a person can change from that kind of darkness to this kind of light, unless it's the Spirit of God in him. So we talked about God's infinitude and His eternity, and those are hard for us to even begin to imagine, but that's part of the point, is to realize you can't even understand the fringe of His way. And yet He still gives us enough knowledge for us to apply and to understand just enough to be transformative. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is two other attributes of God. We're going to be talking about the immutability. What does that mean, immutable? I am the Lord. I do not change. I think of Hebrews, especially with this description of Jesus in Hebrews 13. When he says, Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is always the same. He is the I am. He is the first and the last. He's the beginning and the end. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He is the one who was dead, but now He is, and He's alive forever. So when we think about that extraordinary thought, all the attributes of God then, including this immutability, His omniscience, are true of all the persons of the divine Trinity. So you must really not just think of, when we think of the mystery of God, again, it's beyond our comprehension, as you know. Just to say what I'm about to tell you, and you won't understand what I'm about to tell you, because I don't understand it either. But here we have three co-equal and three co-eternal persons who are, each one of them is fully God, but they're not each other. They are different. They are distinct from one another. And that God, in this divine community, and that's what He is a divine community, because as you know, it takes more than one person for there to be love. And so you have the lover and the beloved, and then the love that flows between them, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's a rich purpose that He has for us. And so He's inviting us to see that He is a being where there's this diversity and unity. There is the one and the many. And you have the whole I, thou, and He's the basis. So He doesn't change. So what are the implications of this when we kind of consider this for our lives? So I'm going to be using Tozer. Sometimes I go back and forth with Packer's book, Knowing God. And these are two classics of the faith, and I believe some of you are using them now. Am I correct about that? Some of you. You will not regret you'll never read the Tozer's The Knowledge of the Holy, and at the end of it say, man, I wasted my time. I could have been doing something. I could have been watching TV. That would have been a good waste. Have you ever regretted watching TV? I do all the time. I say, what was that about? And the idiotic commercials. I haven't seen a commercial, though, in a long time. I never watch regular TV, but it's an astonishment that people actually do such things. And so, but yet we're immersed in that. But that the things that would feed us and that you'd never regret pursuing are the things that we regard as just optional tack-ons, add-ons. But I invite you to think good thoughts, rich thoughts about the living God, because remember what Tozer said at the beginning of this book, that what comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. How can you amplify your vision of God then, so that you become a richer, more alive person? Because the bigger your vision of God, the more alive you realize that He has a purpose, a place, a plan for you. And the bigger vision of God makes you understand big God, small problems, small God, big problems. And that's exactly why we need to expand and enhance our view of God. That's why you've been hearing me talk about using the created order as a force multiplier for doing just that, because it's an astonishment to me just to see the glory of God. And I can't help myself. I've got to show you one recent image. Here's one that I just took yesterday. I was walking, I like to go in the back of the house there, and then I found this it's about this large, just this seed pod from one of the trees. And there are hundreds of them right now on there with the pollen and all that. But I said, what a marvel. I held it up to my hand and I said, look at this wonder. And if you could go into that thing and realize you're surrounded by wonder and by beauty, and you hardly ever notice it, you see. And so look at this camellia, this exquisite, and it goes on forever. And so this clematis, and again, this beauty, and all these wonderful, rich colors and patterns, and the beauty of these trees, the Chinese maple and so forth. So even in my own garden, God is you can behold Him. And in fact, when we were together here, Bob and I were listening to the birds when he picked me up. He's a great guy. He picks me up at 6:15 in my driveway. And that's the system. I haven't had to drive here now in many months, you see. Bob, and usually Lewis Bridges is with him. But we were noting the sound of the birds there, and then when we got out of the car, the birds again. How many times do you thank God? How many times do you marvel at that beauty that's around you? We're immersed in it and we hardly even notice. Now that has nothing to do with the immutability of God. So, but that's okay. But we see here that God Himself does not change. And when you consider, we're going to be speaking, we'll see how far we go. You know, you do realize these ideas are just, I'm not a slave to them, you know, so we can actually, you come up with a plan. I may only get to talk about the immutability. Perhaps we'll talk about His omniscience as well. But James 1:17, it tells us there is no shadow, there's no darkness in Him. And so we consider the implications of that. So if I turn to James just for a minute, and as you know, you cannot read the book of James without being completely convicted. It'll nail you every time. He's reading your mail. But he says this, and this is so important for us to grasp. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. Isn't that a lovely image? That's used only here, I think. The Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. He does not change, no variation, no movement. but he is the Father of light, and therefore what he provides for his children is always going to be what he knows is best for them. And so he never differs from himself, as Tozer puts it. The concept of a growing or developing God is not found in the scriptures. That is but you know where it's being taught right now? Being taught in seminaries. Most of the mainline seminaries are teaching that sort of a thing. It's basically a kind of what they call process theology, which has long since been become passé, but they don't know it yet because they're always behind. Because it's always Francis Schaeffer's line of despair. He always said the philosophers get it first, and then the artists pick it up. There's an intuitive sense. And so it's philosophy, then art, then music, and then general culture, and that's the last ones to catch on are the theologians. So as I remember how Chuck Colson used to say, most theologians are running around wearing theological bell bottoms. It's funny, they think they're so cool and relevant, and the delicious irony is they're always behind the times because in their quest to become relevant, they modify the text of truth and let the culture determine it. Then they basically take a thin kind of a veneer, you see, and they put that veneer over the cultural agenda. And then they think that they're being prophetic, and they're actually being hopelessly irrelevant. Process philosophy was out many years ago, but they haven't caught on. But you will only be relevant when you realize that you're speaking of one who never changes. So his word never changes. And what's the interesting thing about the people that he's made, the image bearers, are that although cultures change dramatically, we're not in an agrarian culture, we're not in the ancient Near East anymore, so many different things in most of our cases, and yet we find that you and I are the same as our forebears in terms of our character, our capacities, the image of God, that we are all spiritual beings, but we're also amphibious beings because we're embodied we all on this very short time in this earthly planet. And so we have the same aspirations, the same needs because God's wired them. And remember when Augustine said, "You've made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee." He's saying that, in fact, or to use C.S. Lewis, if any good in which you fix your hope that's not trans-temporal and trans-finite is going to be an idol, and it'll break your heart. You need something beyond the time, trans-temporal, something beyond your imagination, trans-finite. He's got to be big enough to sustain all things and to hold your hope and that which you are fixing in him. Because you see, you can actually hitch your wagon to that star, and that will not ever descend. You have the true anchor, a true north. And that's why I like this image here. And this image, you see how I'm now kind of cheating and actually giving you a preview of this seminar we're going to be doing at the Cove on May 13 to 15. And the reason why I call it is because security, hope, and rest, we all, and God knows we all need them. And this world is without them. And so you can see the center panel then. There's a fixed point. There is an unchanging star, you see, and it's a true north, and it points to him. And we have an anchor for our soul, a hope that's both sure and steadfast, and one which enters the veil. So God himself knows, literally, because he created this way, that no earthbound good is ever going to be big enough to sustain the awful weight of your human desire because he made you for himself. And so he's made you, and you have needs, for example, for security, for significance, and for satisfaction, which only he can provide. And so given this idea that he cannot change for the better, because if he can change for the better, he's not perfect. And if he changes for the worse, well, that's not a good thing at all to even imagine. You see, he's immutable, and there's the one point that never lets you down. in spite of the turmoil of the world itself, and that's the imagery we had on those two side panels, roiling water and fierce lightning and gales above. We never know what we're going to encounter in this world, but God does. And the one who fixes his hope on him will never be disappointed. So he cannot change for the better, for the worse. He is the self-existent creator. And given this idea then, his moral character will not change. His divine essence will not change. So one who can suffer any slightest degree of change is neither self-existent, self-sufficient, nor eternal. And so is not God. So again, how is it that people work? We are inveterately religious. We have no option. We are very religious people. We worship, but it'll be an idol for our own destruction that we've invented, whether it's possessions or position or power or promotion or popularity or people. Any of these things and others are all idols for destruction because they're never enough to sustain your deep longing. That's why I want you as men to come into touch in a very growing sense. What's your deepest longing? What do you want more than anything else? Why is it that we allow ourselves to get in the rut of routine? And so we miss out on our true purpose, our true course, our true direction. That we have this brief time on this planet and we focus much more on retirement or our children or whatever, failing to grasp that little portion of our life. Let's say it's 6 inches long. And suppose eternity were only 1,000 miles long. Okay, which is just to be an example. Imagine the folly of a person who spends all his endeavor, all his concepts, and his planning, everything he does is about making this the 5th inch better than the 4th inch. You see, and then he goes off into retirement village and he lives forever and ever. It's crazy. What are you thinking? You know, it doesn't take any faith to believe, no faith at all, to believe that we're going to be out of here real soon. I don't care how healthy you are or how young you are or old you are going to be out of here really soon. And that little dash between the 2 years on a grave, that dash is that dash that tells us about our longing. There's got to be something more than this. Now, I've shown this to you before, but I can't resist it, because, again, we want to have something eternal. And so, it's George, he's taking it with him. We see, you can't take it with you. Well, George is trying to do it because you can see the widow she's saying, look at that, even he's taking a piano. And the TV, the golf clubs, even this dog, and they go up into this. Well, you can't take it with you. And that's why I say you never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. Or do you? Strange, who would have this, but there you have it. And then remember, I showed you this before when we were talking about our own life. And remember, this represents 75 years in dots, so every dot then is a day. So what you have then in this matrix then is that you have, that's 100 days. That's what we're dealing with there. So that's your life. And he says, he's splitting the difference. As for the days of our life, they're but few. He's given us, 70 years, or if due to strength, 80, but they soon fly away. So he splits the difference and figures 75 years. Now, I'm living on borrowed time now. See, I'm going to have my 77th birthday in July. How did I get so old? And I'd love to say it this way, in every older person, there's a young person inside saying, what happened? You know what happens is so little by degree that you accept that decline, that degradation, that degeneration. It's not that way things were meant to be. We know it. We were never meant to die. We were never meant to get old. We were never meant to get sick. We were never meant to see the sorrow of separation. And he's preparing a world in which those former things will no longer be. That's a wonderful thought when you consider that. But I don't have to then take any proof to realize how brief your life is. And so the person who came up with that chart happened to be born the same year I was. So he figured if that would be the case, he'd be given 20/20, and that would be it. But then I think of this: when as a child I laughed and wept, time crept. When as a youth I dreamed and talked, time walked. When I became a full-grown man, time ran. When older still I daily grew, time flew. Soon shall I find in traveling on, time gone. And there is a pathos, isn't there? There's a sadness. We realize that. One out of one dies, we know that. So why then would you be preparing for making the fourth inch better than the third, and the fourth inch, and it's over after 6 inches, and it's 1,000 miles. But actually that's not true, because this is as nothing at all. It would be invisible. When you think about the 1,000-year perspective, and I want you to consider this well, remember this moment 1,000 years from now. Take a photo of it, and it'll be this. You'll look back and realize, oh, indeed, it was so. My whole life was as a moment in time. But eternity, it yawns before us, it stretches out into the ages of eternity, because his years never end. And so he's called us into that eternal communion and that eternal union with one who cannot change and whose time will not end. So God is the one, as Anselm put it, was the one of whom then nothing better can be conceived. And so he has no parts. All that God is, he has always been, and all that he has been, he will ever be. Now, Packer makes a comment on this, because he has a chapter in his book, Knowing God, on God Unchanging. And I want to draw out just 6 things that he mentions very briefly. God's life does not change. His life, his vitality never changes. Secondly, his character does not change. He never becomes less truthful or merciful or just or good than he used to be. I am that I am is who he declares himself to be. His truth will never change. Whereas in this world, it's up for grabs, and you know that. And furthermore, his ways will not change. You can depend upon him. His immutability has vast implications for our life and journey. And then we can say God's purposes do not change. And so he's omniscient and omnipotent. And so he tells us God is not a man that he should lie, neither the Son of Man that he should repent. Hath he said, and shall he not do it? Or hath he spoken, and shall he not make it good? That's who he is. You see, the counsel of the Lord stands sure, and the thoughts of his heart to all generations. And so finally, God's Son does not change. And the one who is eternal, who has Zoe, the eternal life of the living God, a life with no beginning, no end, is now in you. So that you and I will live because he is in us, because he lives, so also will you live. So around your tables then, because I'm not going to do the second part, that's perfectly fine. We'll do so therefore my little question has changed. Forget about the divine omniscience. We'll deal with that next time and others like that. But I want you to think about the implications of the immutability of God. And I want to unpack that for you when we come back. So I want you to think, what means or what difference does this truth make today, this day, when you go to work? Think about that. In my group, when we were looking at the immutability of God, we came up with a number of applications, and I'll be curious to see what you arrived at. One thing we talked about was our view of the past, the present, and the future. Because if Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, then it means that what he allowed in your past actually changes your perspective, doesn't it? When you realize, even though you did not like many things, you look back and realize that his purposes will always be for your unchanging good. What he's allowed, so that God redeems what he allows in your life. And then it has to do with your perspective on the present tense. And so again, it has to do with trusting him in the past, trusting him in the present tense as well, with these decisions that you're going to be making today. And when you make a contract or you're doing something with a client or a customer, you realize that you depend upon God and not that person. That person may or may not mediate your needs that you have, You're called to love the one who does not change, because his love for you is unchanging, unwavering. It's with everything without hypocrisy, without any deceit. And then in the future, you consider for the past, the present, and your future hope as well. Or it relates to this, as we were in our group talking about those three issues of security, hope, and rest. And certainly, my view of God in mutability is going to affect my view of security. Because if he changes, I'm in serious trouble. If I hope, he called you and me to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And it's a living hope, not a dead hope. How many of our hopes have died? But those who hope in him will never be disappointed. And then rest. God knows we need rest for our souls. And I'd say a component of that is contentment. So immutability, I think, relates to contentment as well. Because you can be content that God's unchanging, unwavering aspiration, desire for you is for your best interests. And remember how I was describing the love of God, the steady, and really the love that he allows us to have in his agape? The steady, remember it? The steady, that went over well, didn't it? I've only given it to you 50 times. The steady intention of your will to another person's highest good. Boy, that went over well. Yeah, you really remembered that one, yeah. But just think about that kind of love. There's a love that's not subject to the whims and seasons of circumstance, but it's a steady, unflinching, unwavering intentionality, a desire for what is your best good. And by the way, you don't know what it is. Only God knows your best interests. You have the illusion that you do. And that's why you and I often argue with God when he allows things that we construe are not in our best interests. He says, child, I love you in such a way that my intention is always for your best good, for your best interests. I have them in mind. And by the way, I'm the only one who can pull them off. So contentment, gratitude, trust, security, hope, rest, peace, the fruit of the Spirit, having joy in a roiling world of conflict and chaos and confusion. But here, you and I have an anchor for our soul that is fixed and firm and steadfast. And it makes me want to show you that, and then we'll just see what other thoughts you might have. But in Hebrews chapter 6 then, this rich metaphor of God's unchanging promises. And so he could swear by no one but greater than himself, and because he doesn't change. And his promises are always as good as his character. They never change. And so he says, desiring more to show the heirs of the promise, the unchangeableness of his purpose, interposed with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie. You see his character. It's impossible for him to lie. We who have taken refuge, you see, in our little bark in this big wide ocean, we have taken refuge would have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope set before us. This beautiful metaphor, this hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil. This hope is an anchor for the soul. What other thoughts do you have that came up around you? Yes?
Didn't quite hear, that's also part of our hope, is he's the only one who never changes. The universe is expanding.
Yes, yeah.
The North Star is moving. Magnetic north will move. The continents drift. But God is the only thing that never changes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we can have enforcement of our faith because of that.
Yes, that's true. We look at the world, the created order, and the created order is constantly changing. And you never could be sure what's going to be happening with whether it's the weather or whether it's even the direction of the North Star, because as he's rightly to say, it won't be the North Star after enough time, you see, because it's moving. And you're running around the sun at 66,000 miles an hour right now in your Earth. And then our solar system is moving through our galaxy at actually hundreds of thousands of miles an hour, and the galaxy itself is turning around at even a faster rate. And that galaxy then itself is moving toward the center of the galactic or local group, and then that part is part of a larger group, and then the Virgo cluster and the Virgo supercluster. It's more and more astonishing. All of that's roiling. What's that?
I'm getting dizzy.
So the message, Ken, is don't try to jump off.
Don't jump. Yeah, this is something you hold on, cling. Here. To whom will I go? And I'm going to leave you this word because I think that's one of the great motivators. It's underestimated. There are times I have a section in motivational spirituality and conform to His image. One of them is a negative motivator, and it is the idea of no other option. You see, you have fixed your wagon, I said, to His star. Once having done that, you've burned your bridges, to use another metaphor. You can't look back, you see? The idea is now, what happens though when everything is so horrendous, circumstances so chaotic? There are times when the only thing you can hold onto is I have no other option. I don't know where you're taking me, but I've fixed my wagon to you. And I believe that you have a purpose. And those who hope in you will, what does it say about disappointment? Never be disappointed. So that's a hope both sure and steadfast. And God knows we need that because that's the foundation for true security, true identity. Because God's not going to love you more tomorrow than He does now, or less than He loves you now. His love is unchanging. Because it's not based upon something that we do, but rather because of who He is. When He loves us, He's being Himself. And that is a wonderful hope and purpose for all of our lives.